here to talk to you.
Colt may look like your ordinary 10-year-old boy.
Hi.
But his family feels there has been a transformation. They credit medical marijuana for taming his severe autism. They had been living in Arizona.
I'm sitting at my wit's end crying, not knowing what I'm going to do for my son. But I knew he could have a better quality of life.
Stories and videos of autistic children harming themselves, then finding relief through marijuana, have brought many to this state.
I knew that if I came here to Colorado, that I would be protected, that I could get Colt his medical card, and I could start treating him with cannabis.
Colt qualified due to a rare skin condition. His mother began giving it to him in different forms, vaping and homemade tinctures with strong levels of the psychoactive component THC.
I make this probably about once a week.
From their own plants,
Try to grab what I think is 28 grams.
Jamie showed us how she bakes,
Into the oven.
grates,
Let me take that.
and mixes the cannabis with coconut oil to create what she considers a miracle drug for her son. The difference has been visible. His eating compulsion has stopped.
Jump on the trampoline.
He is now able to attend school and speak.
At CBS 4.
Yeah, CBS 4.
While the results appear dramatic, they have been faced with criticism that they are getting Colt high.
A typical mind smoking cannabis, I feel a euphoric high effect, okay? Does an autistic mind feel that?
High five. That was amazing.
But the state health department warns that medical marijuana can be harmful to children with autism and that there is no scientific evidence that it is effective. To Jamie Kropp, that doesn't matter.
There was a little boy lost inside of his body. And since coming to Colorado, we've gotten our family back.
What you're watching right now is Mark Zartler committing a crime that helps his daughter, who cannot help herself. 17 years ago, Christy Zartler gave birth to twin girls.
Keely, her twin, came home first, and then 3 days later, Kara followed her.
And they began the difficult years-long task of learning how to treat Kara's cerebral palsy and severe autism.
This is an antipsychotic.
There are antipsychotics and enzymes and sleep aids. But few things helped fight off the worst of her symptoms. That could sometimes go on for hours.
Pretty much on a daily basis, we have some sort of episode.
When it's heating up, I turn off the fan, have a level 1/8 of a teaspoon.
When Mark found the one thing that could stop his daughter, he made this video to show the world. It takes 6 deep breaths. And a father's dedication.
Yeah, let's get up. It's okay. Got me up. Okay.
The video is the truth, right? That's typical of what we see.
A neighbor first suggested years ago that cannabis could ease Kara's symptoms. Mark then found that by grinding marijuana buds and heating them to 410 degrees Fahrenheit, it created an immediate rescue response to his daughter's most violent behavior.
And by 10, she's usually back out here enjoying life again.
For several years, we were in fear of using it, trying it, giving it to her, having it.
But now there is no fear for the Zartlers, who risked everything by posting the video of Mark illegally treating Kara that more than 12,000 people have seen, and by talking to us.
I got to the point where we looked at the law and said the law's not going to change unless somebody gambles.
From the moment she was delivered and rushed to pediatric intensive care, she knew something was drastically wrong.
I was talking to the nurse, and the nurse said, let me take her. She took her to look at her, put her down, and she had a seizure. And she was 29 minutes old.
An EEG confirmed the worst, a suppression burst pattern indicative of a rare form of epilepsy known as Odahara.
This must have come as one heck of a shock.
I was devastated. Her neurologist at the time in Ontario sat us down, and my husband and I were sitting on couches, and he gave us a diagnosis, and it didn't mean anything to me, the name. So I asked him, what is her prognosis? And he said, you'll be lucky if you get to take her home.
But she did make it home, and what came next was months and indeed years of adjusting medications, trying to find something to slow down the constant seizures.
Her seizures were probably once every 5 minutes or so. She would have hundreds a day. So basically what she was doing was sleeping and seizing.
How severe were they?
They were pretty, like her oxygen would dip. Sometimes it would dip to the 30s. She would turn blue.
Must have been frightening you to death.
It was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying.
The family rallied. Her husband, the boys, both healthy, gladly took on the task of caring for their little sister, and others helped too. Online, she could find comfort and ideas from families in similar circumstances. Samantha Cameron, the wife of British Prime Minister David Cameron, was part of her support group for a time. Their little boy Ivan was also born with Odahara.
It was comforting to find support. I don't know how I would have gotten through those early days without them. Family is important, but nobody knows what you go through. No. Those people do, though.
But one by one, the drugs were failing or causing more problems than they fixed.
You thought you were losing her.
That's what our neurologist said. Sometimes there's just nothing left for us to do. We brought her home. I told my boys. That was the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. So, we just kind of prepared and it talked and, what we wanted to do and how we wanted things to go and if we wanted her cremated or awful conversations no parent should ever have.
A last desperate chance to save her daughter brought her online, where other parents were talking about the wonders of cannabis oil. Sarah decided she had nothing to lose.
There were no children with Odahara at the time who had tried it. So she was the first, and
how soon before you saw a response?
Immediately. We saw, that day, seizures just weren't there. She wasn't seizing.
She obtained a prescription for medical marijuana. That's what she was taking out of the oven, which she turns into cannabis oil for Maya.
I'm just putting in 250 mils of coconut oil.
She has developed a process to extract the oil to get a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD, the active ingredients in marijuana that have changed her daughter's life. The whole family's life, really.
Are you happy?
It means that we all can breathe, I guess, a little bit. We've always felt like, we're just holding our breath, waiting.
Yeah.
Now it's just so much different. We can do things as a family. My 16-year-old can watch her, no issue. I don't have to worry about a major medical emergency, and having nursing staff here.
After 6 months, they performed another EEG at sick kids and were astounded by the results.
He said that it was completely normal, and he said miracles happen in the email.
And indeed, he did. So when her doctor wrote, not a month later, to say, due to the strict nature of the policy implemented here at Children, I am not allowed to fill the forms for renewal of medical marijuana, I apologize for the inconvenience this may cause, she was stunned. She decided to go public, a website,
I can almost see it.
A powerful video
That is a prolonged seizure.
and media interviews.
A lot of people said that I was stupid. Even friends, family told me to just shut my mouth. I'm basically inviting the police and social services to my door, but I thought, well, you can come because nothing else has ever worked. And if she stops this treatment, she'll die. So it wasn't really an option. I wasn't going to stop treatment. That was just not even an option for me.
Even if it turns you into a
Absolutely.
criminal.
I would have gone to jail. I mean, I think any one of us would die for our children. Going to jail is a walk in the park compared to that. So, and you know, watching her like she used to be is just something that I'll never do again.
Since I've been on this cannabis, I've actually been seizure free for today. It's 974 days, so we're coming up on 1,000. So I think that's pretty good.
Pretty good indeed, because this was once the life of Alexis Bortel. Seizures every few days, as seen in these videos taken at the direction of her doctors. Her parents say epilepsy medications didn't work, and there was even talk of brain surgery.
What do you call epilepsy?
Well, I call it my seizure monster.
But this seems to tame the seizure monster, an oil made from marijuana taken twice a day. Her family lived in Texas, where they couldn't get the oil they needed, but they could in Colorado, where both medical and recreational pot are allowed. For her father, Dean Bortel, the decision to move here 3 years ago was an easy one.
I would die for her, right? So the least I could do is uproot my life and give her a chance at the exact same freedoms and future I had.
You'd do it again?
Twice on Sunday.
Hey, Tegan.
Tegan is having a seizure, one of so many each day. Her mum, Emma, can no longer keep count. The 9-year-old's epilepsy is caused by a rare genetic condition that has also delayed her development.
She doesn't talk. She walks a little bit. Basically, she's like a baby. I can handle her disability, but it's the epilepsy. It's different every day, and it's so severe that it's really hard.
When the government first allowed the prescribing of cannabis-based medicines last November, Emma persuaded Tegan's doctors to let her try one of them.
It has helped, yeah.
The effect was encouraging, but now Tegan's seizures are coming more frequently again, so Emma wants her to try different drugs derived from cannabis. Parents thought they'd won that right after their successful campaign to get the law relaxed, but the NHS guidelines for doctors state there must be clear, published evidence of benefit, and the drugs Emma wants to try haven't been through stringent clinical trials.
Even if it has got side effects in later life, I'm willing to take that risk. People don't seem to remember that epilepsy can kill. Any seizure could kill anybody. I go to bed every night wondering if she's going to wake up in the morning.
So last week, Emma took the matter into her own hands, taking Tegan to the Netherlands to get a prescription from a doctor there. But her application for an import licence was refused, and on the way back she was stopped at airport customs and all the medicines were confiscated. This afternoon, the Health Secretary admitted the system is failing families.
The guidance is not a barrier to prescription, but I am also clear that this isn't working. Hence, I've put in place the process evaluation, which is what the NHS language for looking at exactly why this isn't working and what we need to do about it.
To watch it has to be the most horrific thing that a mother has to watch. Billy has a very severe form of epilepsy. He has a life-threatening form of epilepsy. One seizure can kill him. Billy's anti-epileptic medication was stopped abruptly when it was confiscated at London Heathrow Airport. And at 1 a.m. on the Tuesday morning, Billy had a seizure. Tuesday he had 2, Wednesday he had 3, Thursday 3, and then Friday morning he woke up in a seizure and they were going back to back. They break your child's body, they break your child's mind, and slowly, slowly, you just watch your child slipping away from you. My little boy, Billy, had his medicine confiscated.
Over the weekend, I issued an emergency license to allow Billy Caldwell's medical team to access cannabis-based medicine to treat life-threatening seizures caused by a severe form of epilepsy.
He got his first dose on Saturday. By Monday, he was starting to perk up, and you could see him, which was just truly amazing. He's just full of love, laughter. He likes swimming, he likes horse riding, anything that spins. But this was never just about Billy for me. I would in no way ever declare that medicinal cannabis is a cure. But what I would say is it is definitely a medicine that children like Billy should be given a chance to try.
There is a pressing need to allow those who might benefit from cannabis-based products to access them.
There is a risk that the government is becoming out of touch with what people are actually doing. I mean, I have some perfectly respectable neighbours, good bourgeois types who, without giving the game away or naming them, you know, whenever they're sitting in of an evening, got nothing else to do, they roll up a spliff and quietly smoke it together.
In her quest to help Andy deal with pain, his wife Ruth is learning how to make cannabis oil for his vape. He wants to quit smoking it because of the impact on his lungs.
I've had to learn how to do all of this because nobody sort of tells you.
So Ruth, can you tell me what are we doing in your kitchen today?
Right, we're going to be cooking up cannabis vaping oil so that Andy can put it into his vaporizing machine and he vapes it.
Why can't you just buy this stuff?
Because it's illegal. Doing this, I'm committing a criminal offence. So give it a test and see what you think.
I think you got the mixture right.
But I just need to get the flavour right.
It's just the flavour.
Right.
I don't know really what word to describe it other than dirty underwear.
What I want is something safe for him to use. And for me, even though it's not really something I would normally have ever done, I've got to the stage now where I think, I've got to do something because this is what works. It stops him shaking. He can, you know, get out and about. He doesn't want to get stoned. He just wants to sort of lead a normal life. I was doing cheese for my cheese on toast. And
She begged.
she begged. So I said, I'm not going to give it to you until you sit down. She sat down first time.
Andy used to take more prescription medication before using cannabis. So since he started taking in the cannabis, what medications has he stopped using?
These ones that I'm pulling out now.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh, and the fentanyl patches.
And the fentanyl patches. So that's 8. So that's 8 prescribed medications that he's off.
Yes.
Since taking in the cannabis.
Yes.
The spasms have already slowed right down. And I'm probably 10 minutes into smoking this. None of my medicines work this quickly. None of them.
I've researched all of Andy's medical conditions. I research all of this. And I know basically what it does to his body. So I would rather have this than all the pills he was taking any day of the week, because I get the person I married back again.
Okay.
You said that you've seen a difference, and you have a son. He's also seen a difference.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me what he was like with the medication and what he's like after he has cannabis?
He had Dad at home, but Dad wasn't here. He would describe it as having a shell, and it's there, but it doesn't do anything. It was always me taking him out, taking him to school. It was me out in the playground. Well, he never got that until Andy started using cannabis.
This is the only thing I do in my life that's illegal. It helps improve the relationship with my son, because even if I'm really ground down from pain, I can still find that 10 minutes for that chat that he needs, that he can't talk to his mum about.
I'm gonna push you out of bed.
Only because I can't get up.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you want to watch?
I don't really care. You'd be like a turtle. Except the part where you wouldn't be able to move at all.
What do you want? Copycat killers? I'll tell you what, they've got the 2-pack one. Mainly you want me to watch 2-pack. And on opiates, he's got even less chance of that. You know? Opiates, it's like alcohol, it's not conducive to a family life. He was the true working man's poet.
Aren't they wondering why death rates are going up and suicide is going up? More kids are being handed crack than they're being handed diplomas. I think that rich people should live like poor people and poor people should live like rich people, and they should change every week.
And you would say that before cannabis and after cannabis is a total...
Yeah, it's polar opposites, really.
How so?
Like, he's just a lot happier, he can do more stuff, like, he tries to cling on to the little things like putting a t-shirt on, because with his shoulders and everything like that, it's impossible, but because of the medical cannabis, it gives him the will to do it. I guess it's just like better for the whole family because we're all just less stressed and we're all more relaxed. The only thing you really need in your life is family.
If something's legal, I'd rather take the legal option any time of the week. I don't want that fear of prosecution. It's degrading, that worry, because you're doing something to help your pain and to help your family from breaking apart, because being disabled is a great strain on family life.
What do you think of cannabis? Do you see it as a sort of a medicine, or do you see it as an illegal drug?
I see it as a medicine, but I can also see why it's an illegal drug, because if you don't understand it, you'll just get high on it. But I don't think people should be persecuted for wanting to help their illnesses.
People think it's hard for the disabled person, but it's not. It's far harder for the family of the disabled. And that's the aspect I find the hardest to deal with mentally. I find it the most upsetting.
I know it's illegal, but it gets to the stage where you think, society can judge me, I don't care.
Hello. What would your life be like if you didn't have cannabis?
I'd be bedbound.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not even just pain relief?
Oh, it's not just pain, it's everything. It's my brain fog, my cognitive ability, my bowel and bladder control, my pain never leaves me, I'm always in pain.
You're always, like, you're in pain right now?
Oh yeah, the only time I'm not in pain is when I'm asleep. Does it make my life better on a daily basis? Yeah, absolutely it does. There's no negative consequence to my action. If I had a heart defect and I was on heart medication, no one would criminalise me for that. Last time I checked, there were over 7,000 registered cannabis strains on the market worldwide. When you grow up, at some point you become aware that there's alcohol, and you make a decision quite early on what type of alcohol you want to try. But as you get older, you determine what you like. Within that red wine and white wine, there's hundreds of different grape varieties. And you might like a certain grape, but you might only like it grown in Australia, not in Spain. And it's exactly the same.
Well, that's just crazy talk.
What I always encourage people to do is to try it, and if they find a strain that works for them, then keep trying it, and then try another one, and try another one, and try another one.
So you can, not only can you get different strains, then you get weaker to stronger.
Yeah.
You get different active chemicals within each of the strains.
Different cannabinoids, different terpene profiles.
Cannabinoids.
Cannabinoids. Fortunately, I now have a longer list of what works for me, whereas before I had a longer list of what didn't work for me. It's non-toxic. The reported deaths of cannabis now is equal to the amount of deaths of people gored by unicorns. Zero.
Wow.
It's the
It's
same.
not like crack cocaine or
No,
heroin,
crack
is
is
it?
whack. Just say no. The thing is with heroin though, here's an interesting thing. People break their hip, go into a hospital, and they're given dimorphine. Dimorphine is heroin. When they come out, they're not addicted to it. They don't go and score themselves a bag of brown off the street corner. Doctors are happy to prescribe me a lot of opiate-based medication, morphine. It's important to make people aware that opiates work on the same part of your brain as your respiratory regulatory system. So if you overdose on opiates, you might stop breathing. Cannabis does not work on that same system, so you can't overdose on cannabis. Cannabis is a safe, non-toxic plant. Cannabis isn't a cure for anything, but it has the potential to help your body and give it a chance. Two types of cannabis consumers on the planet, those that do and those that don't. There's no such thing as medical cannabis, it's just cannabis. I think it's important to talk about, people hear the sensationalist stories in the media about cannabis causes psychosis. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. You've got to have a predisposed susceptibility to a psychotic illness, and cannabis then may become a trigger. Say now that's 5% of people that ever try cannabis. So the prohibitionists are trying to stop 95% of people consuming it to keep 5% of people safe. That's not done. You don't do it with alcohol or tobacco or prescription drugs. There's opioid epidemics all over the world. People are dying from prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Because it was an opiate made in a factory, not by some fella up a mountain or some fella in his bedroom, it's okay. Half the states in America, hundreds of millions of people worldwide, and hundreds of millions of people in Europe have access to cannabis.
The UK's the weird one.
Yes. Prohibition is a political mindset. It starts and ends with you. Legality should not be a grounding for morality. Homosexuality was illegal. Women voting was illegal. That's not morally right, is it? Just because something's illegal doesn't mean it's morally right. Cannabis is illegal. Is that moral? No. Not when hundreds of millions of people all over the planet have access. And because we live on an antiquated island,
We're stuck with it.
cannabis was made legal in California in 1996. So they've had 20 years of people consuming cannabis. So any fears that people have, go and look at the data from California.
Drug prohibition in the UK began during the First World War, with the Army Council banning the sale of highs such as cocaine, opium, cannabis and other drugs to the troops. The ruling on cannabis was extended to the civilian population in 1928, following a League of Nations conference on narcotics in Geneva. An Egyptian delegate, supported by the US and China, convinced the conference that cannabis was as dangerous as heroin. In contrast to the punitive approach in the US, the emphasis in the UK remained on treatment for drug addiction. It wasn't until the explosion of drug use among young people in the 1960s that the government opted for tougher action. The 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, which classifies drugs by their perceived harmfulness, remains the key piece of legislation to this day. It banned even medicinal use of marijuana. In the late 90s and early noughties, legalization campaigns were in full swing, arguing that government policy had placed the cannabis trade into the hands of criminals.
Film campaign groups are calling on the NHS to do more to help patients who are trying to get medical cannabis. They claim that since legalization last year, there have been no new NHS prescriptions for medical cannabis containing the two main components of the cannabis plant, CBD and THC. In the meantime, private cannabis clinics are opening in the UK, and the private sector is offering patients what they cannot get on the NHS. The costs of that can run to hundreds of pounds a month. Here's Sophia Batista's report.
This is medical cannabis. It's been legal in the UK for almost a year.
I really can't imagine my life without cannabis.
But there's a problem.
Nothing's happened, nothing's changed.
People are not getting it on the NHS. And as a result, private clinics are opening up.
We can be a lifeline for patients in need.
But this comes at a cost.
It's outrageous and cruel that patients are having to spend so much of their own money.
So why did the government legalise medical cannabis if the NHS isn't prescribing it? And are private cannabis clinics the only option for patients? Medical cannabis was made legal in November 2018. Many with conditions like epilepsy, chronic pain and MS got their hopes up.
Today's announcement is so special.
They thought this would open up their treatment options, but that hasn't happened. And in this vacuum, the private sector has seen a gap in the market.
I'm on my way to a private cannabis clinic that's about to open in London. It looks like patients with chronic conditions are resorting to places like this because they say it's impossible to get a prescription on the NHS.
Patients who come to this clinic need to be approved by a specialist doctor before they can get a prescription.
So there are some conditions for which I think there's good evidence for cannabis to be useful. So you'd have to have one of those conditions, like pain, for example, or anxiety, or nausea and sickness in the context of chemotherapy, or epilepsy.
The problem? It's very expensive.
Consultation fee to the patient is a fairly standard amount of £250. Then on top of that, when they receive the prescription from their chemist, they'll have to pay something like £600 to £800 per month for the prescription.
Most people can never afford this. Do you think you're exploiting patients?
No, absolutely not exploiting patients at all. And this is the only way patients who are in significant need can get access to this medicine. And that's very sad. It's the only way they can get the medicine they deserve.
But it's people like these who suffer. Charlotte has brain damage and epilepsy. Her mother Cheryl has been trying to get cannabis on the NHS, but was refused twice. She was told it was because she hadn't tried all options available, and it was too expensive for the NHS to prescribe it.
I think it's absolutely disgusting that anyone is having to pay to go private and get a private prescription. The thought of having to pay that on a regular basis, on a monthly basis to fulfil it. Would you be able to afford it? I wouldn't be able to afford to sustain a private prescription on a long-term basis at all, no. I mean, I'm a single mother looking after my daughter. I do work. I don't receive any benefits myself.
And the problem is not lack of supply.
About 3/4 of all medical cannabis that's imported into the UK comes into this facility. They sort it, package it, and deliver it to patients and pharmacists across the country.
It sounds straightforward, but it isn't. The medicine has to go through a lot of rigorous checks, and it takes about 8 weeks to obtain it after it's prescribed. They only import the exact amount they need to fulfill their prescriptions. And that's what makes it so expensive.
And how much would this be?
Something like that is in the region of £500-ish.
£500 for this? And it only lasts for 1 month?
The plant is grown in a controlled environment to ensure it has specific levels of chemicals to treat health conditions.
How many prescription requests have you got since cannabis was made legal last year?
We've received approximately 100 prescriptions so far. All of them have come from the private sector. I think it's fair to say that the NHS hasn't prescribed any cannabis to date.
The two most important chemicals in the cannabis plant are THC and CBD. THC is the part of the cannabis plant that makes people feel high, whereas CBD doesn't have the mind-altering effects that cause that high. But campaign groups say limiting medicine to products that contain only CBD isn't enough. They want access to a wider variety of cannabis-based medicines, some of which contain THC. Like Chelsea, she treats her epilepsy with cannabis. Her vape contains THC and CBD. She says she hasn't had a single seizure since she started using it.
It's completely changed my life. I really can't imagine my life without cannabis. I really feel so grateful that I found this medicine. You know, I've seen cannabis transform people's lives.
The only reason Chelsea can get cannabis is that she lives in New York, and she's brought her medicine with her, while her sister Tamsin, who has a much more severe form of epilepsy, can't get a prescription on the NHS because she lives in the UK.
So what would Tamsin's life have been like if she'd been given cannabis as a baby? Maybe she wouldn't be living in full-time care now. You know, maybe her mental age wouldn't be of a 13-year-old. It shouldn't be about where you're located, you know, and that's what we're seeing with my sister and I, where I live in the US and I have access because of my address and she doesn't because of her address.
So why did the government decide to make medical cannabis legal if the NHS isn't prescribing it?
I don't think the government had done its homework, if I'm perfectly honest. The government raised people's expectations that following legalisation, medicinal cannabis would become readily available. It hasn't. If anything, it's become more difficult for people to obtain it.
Is the UK government failing patients?
I think the UK government is failing patients. The government was wrong to raise expectations. It now has to put that right by delivering on the promises that it's made to the patients.
This cannabis revolution needs to be led by science, and so far it's been led by politics. And I think what people forget is that, you know, for many patients, including my sister, this is a life or death situation.
The Department of Health told us that this pattern of prescribing medical cannabis is quite normal, and that in most countries that have legalized the drug, most prescriptions are given through the private sector. They also said they need more evidence to prove that it works. Campaigners were recently dealt a further blow after a healthcare watchdog said that a lot of medical cannabis products shouldn't be available on the NHS because they're not cost-effective and more clinical trials are needed.
Sadly, at the present time, the only way a patient can get a prescription for medical cannabis is through this clinic.
We are nearly 3.5 years into the change of law since the legalization, if you want to call it such, of prescription cannabis or cannabis on prescription. Since then, we still have only had 3 NHS prescriptions. They were ones that were given in caveat, or rather in exchange for the changings of the law. It was the least that could be done by the Home Office and the UK government, given the fact that they had basically worked together to sort of change the law. I mean, I'm not going to discuss kind of why the law changed, how the law changed. I think that's quite contentious, I guess, depending on whose version of history you want to look at. But yeah, basically it divided the community because we stood outside of Parliament for the protests and we were promised the right to self-identify. We were promised grow your own. We were promised a system more akin to California in the late 90s than what we ended up with, which was a private prescription system, which is probably now only gets, 15,000 people who maybe signed up as private prescription holders. The first people that were paying for it, they were paying close to £1,600 a month prescription charges. It's obviously improved now. There's half a dozen, maybe even closer to a dozen clinics, several dispensaries that they're partnered with, and the UK is sort of seen as importing cannabis from Canada, from Israel, from Australia, and it's a very restrictive system. The doctors are not very well educated whatsoever. They're still not really taught about the endocannabinoid system. They're still prescribing on a THC versus CBD percentage basis. They're not talking about terpenes. The UK prescription cannabis system actually considers anything other than cannabinoids a contaminant. So we're in a very weird system at the minute. I mean, cannabis is available on prescription, but it's a non-licensed prescription medication, so it's not backed by anything really, which is causing a lot of contention in the various fields of research that are obviously seeing efficacy, not just through anecdotal evidence, but also through research, both domestic and international, especially a lot of it being led by Israel predominantly, actually. But yeah, things are not really moving forward very well. There's been several recalls on products. There's been a lot of misinformation, a lot of incredibly angry patients on Reddit and other forums. There's been a lot of allegations of corruption, allegations of cronyism, nepotism, and just a general sense of, well, not nepotism, sorry, cronyism, corruption, and a general sense of just jobs for the boys, as it were, kind of attitude. And yeah, people are not necessarily happy. There's a lot of people just getting a prescription to have a little legal pot so they can go put, Dave from down the street in. There's no real movement on grow your own. There's still a demonization of THC and your so-called recreational or adult consumers. There has been slow movement, I think in part thanks to probably my persistence to modify the language to move away from medical cannabis to calling it prescription cannabis. Because I've obviously been championing this argument that if you say that, well, this is medical and this is cannabis, you're saying this one can't be medical, have medicinal benefit, which is just bullshit. All cannabis has the potential to, because it would supplement the endocannabinoid system as long as it's got cannabinoids. So yeah, there's still obviously a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of sort of false narratives that are going around that are creating these binary groups that actually believe they're at each other's throat or should be at each other's throat when they're being set apart by lobbyists and by vested venture capitalist groups that are set to make far more money from their division than their unity. With regard to CBD, it's been strangled off in a massive way. The Food Safety Authority in the UK took regulation of it last year and started a licensing program for it. Last I checked, there was only a handful had got through, but this represented some like 50,000 products. So basically it's a cartel. The handful of people own CBD in the UK. I mean, they already did through white labeling anyway prior to this, but yeah, it's not good, but it's not really being enforced. It's very much a postcode lottery. Some shops are still selling CBD flower here in the UK and being left alone. I know actually, yeah, I can say this anecdote as long as I don't mention who it is. I do know of a company in the UK that was taken in by the UK Home Office and Taxman and was basically told that they're going to be getting their CBD flower products taxed at 30% and they'll be allowed to continue to sell them as smokables. I should probably chuck an allegedly in there for legal reasons.
So allegedly, who contacted that? This is a bricks and mortar store?
This was a very large business that was a wholesaler. And they were contacted by the UK taxman and basically told that we know what you're doing. We look at all this evidence that we've got. We want retrospectively 30% of your business because this is a taxed commodity. And then we'll leave you to it because the UK is broke, man. The reason that things are happening right now with all these county lines and everything else, it's not about moralizing or save the kids or any of this. It's because the UK is currently losing hundreds of millions, if not billions a year. They speculate that cannabis as an illicit market in the UK is worth like 2.5 to 3 billion. You then look at all of the other drugs and everything else combined. They're having to try and prioritize these big growers not to stop drugs, but to stop that money leaving. Whereas then they can leave domestic operations because Dave down the street's paying his electric. He paid tax on his newts, his feed. You know what I mean? He's then the money he's making from the 20 bags he's selling, he's putting meals on the food on the table for his kid. You know what I mean? He's spending that money in local shops. It's staying in the economy.
The business of growing cannabis in the UK is largely seen as a murky underground operation. But hidden in the hills near Dumfries, a greenhouse measuring almost 3 acres will soon change that perception. This site looks set to be the first medicinal cannabis farm in Scotland and the first in the UK to sell a prescription product domestically. The men behind this pioneering project hope it will help those who use the drug here in the UK.
So right now, there are around 5,000 patients in the UK market who are all reliant on imported products from Canada, Israel, Holland particularly. At the moment, there is no domestic offering. By being able to produce these products in this country will make the supply chain somewhat easier. What we have here will be something that will have UK standards under MHRA to meet our own regulation, and people will be able to be confident that what they're getting meets the UK health standards that we expect from all pharmaceutical products that we use and consume in this country.
The medicinal cannabis industry didn't exist in the UK before November 2018. That's when the UK government changed the law, allowing for prescriptions in limited circumstances, like epilepsy. Since then, the industry has grown exponentially, and it's estimated it could be worth £2.3 billion by 2024, with this facility at the forefront of that push. This greenhouse measures 11,000 square meters, and the temperature in here is just below 40 degrees. When it's fully operational, it will have the capacity to provide 16 tons of medicinal cannabis every year. At the moment, that's enough to supply the entire German market. Because of that, security is tight. We're not allowed to broadcast its exact location, but can say the company hopes to employ people from the local area.
Jobs in the rural community have diminished drastically over the last decade. With mechanisation and everything else, farming is not what it used to be. And we are hoping that we will bring 60 to 80 jobs into this local area. And the job skills are very transferable from what was in this area already. And the eye to detail and the jobs that they used to do in the mills are very similar to the jobs that they'll need to do in the glasshouse.
I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life. That's what scares me about my illness. I wake up every day, I think, oh no, I've got another day to get through. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to do it, is the truth.
Well, if I hadn't found an alternative source of medicine, it probably would have killed me ultimately.
I go to bed scared, I wake up scared, I spend all day scared that the police are going to come and smash my door down. People in my community have been bust, and the police caused wanton destruction and damage in the homes.
Fit and healthy for an 80-year-old. I'm in not bad condition considering. I can still do most of the stuff that I could do 20 years ago. I was diagnosed with kidney failure stage 3 about 2 years ago, and was told that there's very little could be done for me because there was no treatment for kidney failure. I was facing imminent dialysis, which I really didn't fancy because your quality of life goes to hell. And I certainly knew that at my age I was not going to be eligible for transplants. So I thought, well, heavens, what am I going to do? I'm not ready to die, and I have little alternative but to look for a different medicine.
It's now said that I suffer from chronic myofascial pain from joint hypermobility spectrum disorder. It took over 5 years, I think, to get a diagnosis. It's basically a chronic pain condition. So I'm in pain even now, just sitting here. The pain through my ankles and my Achilles tendons is really quite distracting. Same through my back and the rest of my body. I used to be controlled by that fear until pharmaceutical drugs nearly killed me several times, in which case you get a bit more scared of prescription than prosecution. If I abide by this law, it harms my health. I can't abide by a law that harms my health.
I had 24 cannabis plants growing in here as my medicine, and the police came and I told them I'd got it, so they came in, looked at it and removed it. They took all the plants, my lights, and I'm awaiting to see what they're going to do to me. As a horticulturalist, I really enjoyed coming in here. The plants are lovely, there's extremely good vibrations off this room, I loved it. yeah, it's a good plant. It's harmless to everybody, whatever the government say. And I would like to grow my own medicine again. It was very fulfilling, actually, to do it. And I'd really like to get back to doing it again. And I was actually quite proud of how good I was at it.
We are here today to follow the Durham police on a police raid, which, if I had a choice, isn't really something I'd be a part of. It's the fact that I've been on the other side of a police raid twice. I was arrested for something that I was never charged with, but the documentary that we are filming is about weed, and we have to show every aspect of it, and this is something that is a part of it as much as everything else.
The police have had a tip-off about a suspected cannabis grow.
We've gone to the magistrates with that information. The magistrates have to be happy with the information that we give to them for them to give us a warrant. Because if we knocked on the door and somebody had a cannabis growing there, the chances of them letting us in are very slim. There's a strong smell of cannabis coming from the address. Members of the public believe that there's cannabis being grown at the address and that drugs are almost ready to be cropped. Ken and John, if you guys want to go to the back, you're going to force entry to the door.
This is quite an interesting angle.
Been on them before?
Have I?
You've been on 20 before?
No, I've been raided twice before.
You've been raided twice?
Yeah. So you walk into a locals pub and the music stops.
Right? We leading the way?
If you're caught possessing cannabis, you could face up to 5 years in prison. If it's with intent to supply, 14 years. I've no idea what we're going to find, but I feel uneasy about being here.
The size? Said we're on the road.
What wrong?
Once we arrive, 10 coppers and a firearms officer make their way into the building in search of the cannabis grow.
Can't smell any weed. What's the situation so far?
Well, the house itself is in a poor condition inside. It's obviously, there's a few dogs in there. It's like the dogs have taken hold of the property, really. There is people living in there, albeit there's not people in at the minute.
Sorry, what'll do. I can't work out if they've found what they're looking for, but after a 40-minute search, we return to the station, and I get to see what they picked up.
So there's the results of your raid.
That's the result of it. There's not an awful lot in there. People may look at it and sort of think, well, it's an absolute waste of time.
Mm-hmm. Police all over the world know that pictures like this are a deception. These are headlines we all know. The police have made another big bust, and they're keen to show it off, with the drugs laid out on a table and the cameras clicking. Senior police love this coverage. They get to bump up their statistics and push for bigger budgets. Politicians use it to convince everyone their policies are working. And journalists know that drug stories always generate clicks. But there's a dirty secret that every cop in that picture knows. That no matter how impressive the seizures look, it makes absolutely no difference to the drug supply. Not only do we never decrease the drug supply, these busts actively increase violence. If you take out one major drug dealer, all you do is instigate a turf war. And in this war, it's the most violent and ruthless criminals who rise to the top. This is part of the reason why drug gangs now exploit children. Even the National Crime Agency, Britain's version of the FBI, recognised that this approach doesn't work. While there is a user base willing to spend millions and millions of pounds on drugs, we will have an issue with illicit drugs in this country. We can't arrest our way out of that. We need to tackle the drivers behind it.
People do have preformed views which are not based on their own experience but simply what they've heard on the news media, and they haven't really paused to sit down and analyse these views properly. It's a sign of the madness and the criminal violence of our society that it dictates whether or not we may experience the healing effects of this plant. It is an extraordinary thing to call the consumption of marijuana a crime. It is a victimless crime, if it's a crime at all. An individual alone in his or her own house, sampling a plant which has been with humanity since the beginning of time, for that to be called criminal is insane. We live in an insane society that believes it has a right to patrol even our consciousness. Not only to tell us how to behave out there in public, but to tell us actually what to think and what to experience. And that's the main objection to marijuana by our governments, is the effect that it has on consciousness. And they don't care that it is a fantastic pain reliever, which it is. They don't care about its wonderful medical properties. They just want to stop anybody experiencing these effects on consciousness. And no wonder our society is in such a mess, where we imagine we live in a democracy and yet elect governments that actually have the nerve to tell us what we may and may not experience inside our own heads without doing any harm to others. There is so much hypocrisy, so much humbug in government positions on these matters. Governments know perfectly well that the rules that they have made, the misery that they inflict on people's lives, don't get rid of these problems. If we really want to solve the problem of drugs, we need to open up the whole issue to broad public discussion, and we have to accept and admit that certain plant products, such as these ancient hallucinogens that shamans use, are entirely beneficial in their interaction with the human race. This is what governments are afraid of. They are afraid of a citizenry that is fully conscious. They actually want us to be unconscious. They want us to simply focus on this alert, problem-solving, competitive mentality that makes us good consumers and good competitors in the business place. But they don't want us to explore the majestic and amazing depths of our consciousness, because then we just might start asking questions that would be very uncomfortable for the powers that be.
In the late 1920s, a young man outside Tampa in Florida picked up an axe and hacked his family to death. His name was Victor Licata. At that point, cannabis was not illegal in the United States. And a man called Harry Anslinger had taken over the Department of Alcohol Prohibition just as alcohol prohibition was ending. So he inherits this huge government department that's just lost the war on alcohol, it's riddled with corruption, and he wants to keep it going. He had previously said that cannabis was not dangerous, shouldn't worry about it. He suddenly decided that cannabis was the most evil, literally this is his words, the most evil drug in the world. He said, much worse than heroin, he said if Frankenstein's monster met cannabis on the staircase, it would drop dead of fright. And he latched onto the case of Victor Licata. With the help of the kind of Fox News of his day, which was called the Hearst newspapers, he announced that Victor Licata had smoked cannabis. That's why he'd hacked his family to death with an axe. And this is what will happen if we allow cannabis to spread, and we need to ban and prohibit cannabis. It was in the wake of that case that cannabis is banned. Years later, somebody goes back, a researcher went, many years later, decades later, a researcher went back and looked at Victor Licata's files. There's no evidence he even smoked cannabis. His family had been told he needed to be institutionalized a year before because he was severely mentally ill, but they decided to keep him at home. The origins of the war on drugs, which I wrote about in my book, Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs, overwhelmingly look like that. If you'd asked me when I started doing the research for Chasing the Scream, why was cannabis banned? I would have guessed they would have given the reasons then that if you stop someone on the street now, they would give, we don't want kids to use drugs, we don't want people to become addicted. What's fascinating is that stuff just virtually never came up when they were banning cannabis, right? Or indeed the other drugs. It was overwhelmingly a kind of racial panic and absurd hysterias about what was going to happen. Now, the one thing you can say in defense of the war on drugs and the war on cannabis in particular is we've given it a fair shot, right? The United States has spent $1 trillion. It's imprisoned more people than any other country in human history, including Stalin's Russia and Mao's China. It's destroyed whole countries like Colombia. At the end of all that, we can't even keep drugs out of our prisons where we pay someone to walk around the walled perimeter the whole time, which gives you some idea of how well we're ever going to keep it out of a country with 2,000-3,000 mile borders. there is an alternative for how we can think about cannabis. There are places that have legalized cannabis and we can see the results. So I spent a lot of time in Colorado, in Washington State, actually spent time in places that have legalized other drugs. Heroin, for example, has been legalized in Switzerland with extraordinary results. There have been 0 overdose deaths on legal heroin in Switzerland in the more than 13 years since they legalized. But with cannabis specifically, again, we can see the results. When you ban cannabis, several things happen. The first thing that happens is, you will have noticed it does not disappear. It's transferred from licensed legal businesses to armed criminal gangsters. Those armed criminal gangsters have to operate differently to a licensed business. So, you will have noticed the head of Budweiser does not go and shoot the head of Heineken in the face, right? Your local liquor store does not send people to go and stab people in the local bar, right? Exactly that happened under alcohol prohibition, right? I mean, exactly that. It ended the day alcohol prohibition ended. Why? Because when you ban drugs, they have to operate in an illegal market where there's no, and I learned this from lots of drug dealers I spent time with for chasing the scream, not just for fun. There was some fun in it as well. An illegal market can only operate through violence, right? You have no recourse to the law. If I go out of here now and I try to steal a bottle of vodka, the liquor store will call the cops will come and take me away. So there's no need for that liquor store to be violent, to be intimidating. If I go out of here now and try to steal a bag of weed from the people who sell it not so far away, they can't call the cops, right? Cops will come and arrest them. They have to fight me. Now, you don't want to be having a fight every day if you're a dealer. So you've got to establish a reputation for being so frightening that people wouldn't be so stupid as to come and fight you, right? So this is the ratchet effect you get with prohibition. You create a market that can only be regulated by violence, and where there is actually a premium on being the most violent person and the most intimidating person, where you have to be violent and intimidating to protect your market. Now, when you legalize, that goes away immediately. It ended, where is Al Capone? Does anyone even know the head of Smirnoff's name, right? Everyone watching this knows Al Capone's name. I bet nobody watching this knows the head of Smirnoff's name. What changed? It's not the drug. It's the fact that it went from being illegal and therefore controlled by gangsters to legal and being controlled by legal and licensed businesses. The second thing that happens, which is a slightly more wonky point, but I think is really interesting and important, is that milder forms of the drug disappear. So you often get people say, well, we can't legalize cannabis because the cannabis people use today isn't the cannabis people used in the 1960s, right? It's much stronger. It's things like skunk and super skunk. That's true, and it's entirely the product of cannabis prohibition. If you want to understand why, you've got to understand something. Just before alcohol was banned in the United States, most popular drinks by far were beer and wine. After alcohol was legalized again, most popular drinks by far were beer and wine as they remain today. When alcohol was banned, you couldn't get hold of beer or wine anywhere. Most popular drinks were whiskey and moonshine. And you think, well, why is that? Why would banning a drug change the form of the drug? It's for kind of rather prosaic reason. Imagine we had to smuggle enough, alcohol for your local bar from the Mexican border or the Canadian border, right? If we fill our wagon with beer, we'll get drink for 100 people. If we fill our wagon with whiskey, we'll get drink for thousands of people. When you ban drugs, there's suddenly a premium on getting the biggest possible kick into the smallest possible space because it's got to be smuggled, right? It's got to be transported in secret. This happens with all drugs. This is why cannabis has become much more potent. The most popular form of consuming cocaine prior to it being banned was in tea, coca tea. You may remember a drink called Coca-Cola that really did contain exactly what it sounds like. They don't exist anymore. When do you ever hear about Coca tea, right? Coca-Cola exists, but it's not what it was, obviously. Most popular way of consuming opiates by far was a drink called laudanum and something called Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. That was a small trace of opiates, right? Again, they disappear. Most popular form becomes heroin. When you ban a drug, only the most extreme forms of that drug become available. Now, most people who smoke cannabis don't want skunk, right? Just like if I go into a bar around the corner from here today, probably very few people are going to be drinking vodka and no one's going to be drinking absinthe, right? If you're concerned about the more extreme forms of the drug, which I think we should be with cannabis, because it's not a huge relationship, but there's some relationship with dysfunctional behavior, then you want to put a really high premium on getting milder forms of the drug available to almost all the users who want it, right? So that's another effect that happens with legalization. And one of the things that's so moving, everywhere I went where they've moved beyond the war on drugs, from Portugal, where they decriminalized all drugs, to Switzerland, where they legalized heroin for addicts, to Uruguay and Washington and Colorado, where they legalized cannabis, The pattern was always the same. It is super controversial at first, and understandably, people are really worried. And then they see the effects. It's not a silver bullet. There are still problems, but there's such a significant improvement that the support massively rises. So 55% of people in Colorado voted to legalize in 2015. Today, 70% of people support it. Governor Hickenlooper, who opposed it, now says it works really well. They've had a huge increase in tax revenue. I interviewed one former police officer who told me a story about this that really stayed with me. One day in the 70s, he was staking out a dealer in a car park in Wayne in New Jersey in plain clothes. And a kid came up to him and said, "Hey, mister, will you go into that liquor store and buy me some booze? I'm not allowed to, I'm too young." It was like a 12-year-old or something. And he said, "No, get out of here. What are you talking about? Get out of here." So the kid walked over to the drug dealer and bought some drugs from him instead. And he had this kind of epiphany. He's like, oh, actually, legalization, a legal regulated system, puts a barrier between children and drugs that does not currently exist. If you're a parent who doesn't want your child to smoke cannabis, and if you're a parent, you shouldn't, because there is evidence that it can impair development for teenagers, you want to put a really high premium on getting cannabis out of the hands of armed criminal gangs who don't care whether their customers are 13, 30 or 80, and getting it into the hands of licensed, legal, regulated businesses who have something to lose. This is why in Colorado, all the research shows there's been a really significant fall in cartel and organized crime activities as they legalized. There's been a fall in teenagers using. It was already quite low, but it's fallen. There's been a massive increase in tax revenue. You know, it's not perfect. There were some things I would have tweaked in the Colorado legalization, but you know, you can tweak a legal market. We don't have any power over an illegal market. There's nothing we can do about it.
It was 4 days before Christmas, and she was like, "You're not going home today. We need to find out what type of cancer this is." And basically, it was growing so fast that they said that he had about 10 days before the tumour would completely block his airways and he wouldn't be able to breathe. And it was 8 days before they were actually able to pinpoint a diagnosis. And in the meantime, he got sicker and sicker and sicker, obviously. You know, spent Christmas in the hospital. So yeah, it's a very fast growing kind of cancer. So if we hadn't been admitted when we were, goodness knows what would have happened. I don't know. Dread to think.
You know, in reading Chico's story, I get the impression that you could almost see the tumor increasing in size each and every day. Was that the case?
Yes, it was. It very much was. Yeah, the doctors were it was literally growing in front of our eyes, really. It was, the doctors were kind of quite staggered by the speed of the growth.
Is there any explanation as to why children are more susceptible to this particular disease than adults?
No, nobody seems to know. And the problem is that I think it's something like 300 cases a year appear in the United States. So it's one of those very neglected types of cancer that very little research is done, because obviously pharmaceutical companies aren't going to be able to make much profit if they do find some sort of cure or treatment for it. So it's the treatment protocol for this kind of cancer hasn't changed since the 1970s. When he was diagnosed, I was handed this piece of paper with they call it a roadmap for treatment, and I was told that this hadn't changed since the 70s. So it hardly gave me comfort, really, to know that was the case. But yeah, like with a lot of these rare cancers, they're just neglected. The research money seems to be going into the more popular kind of cancers. Apparently only 4% of research money in cancer overall goes towards children's cancers, which in itself is a bit of a scandal, in my opinion, especially when they use bald-headed kids to try and raise money.
Which was worse for Chico in terms of his treatment, the chemo or the radiation?
Really hard to say. I mean, we kind of worked together in tandem to crucify him. The radiation effectively nailed him not being able to eat because it was up in his throat. So, you know, he was really struggling to eat anyway. He was throwing up every day with the chemo, but then throwing the radiation as well. And it's like there was no way he was going to be able to swallow or eat anything. So that's when he started having to be fed intravenously. It's this stuff called TPN, which basically you feed your kid through their arm. You had to hook it up every night, this milky white fluid. And then about 4 months later, we had him fitted with a G tube, so we were able to feed him actual food into his stomach directly. And that's where we started giving him the oil through the G tube, which started off as a sort of clear plastic tube, and by the end of treatment, it was dark brown.
From the oil. Yeah. How did you first find out about cannabis oil?
So we first started to know about oil because the doctors prescribed Marinol, which is synthetic THC. And because they prescribed Marinol, I suddenly was alert. I mean, I was a TV producer before my son got sick, so I spent all my hours in the hospital researching what we could do to try and help his odds of survival, which weren't good enough as far as I was concerned. We were kind of led to believe it was around 50-50, which, if they'd said he's got a 99.9% chance of getting well with this, then I could have sat back and been okay. But 50-50, it's like, that's not really good enough. So I was online all the time trying to find out about stuff and, trying to navigate my way through what was snake oil, what was possibly useful. So the doctors prescribed Marinol, so I started researching cannabis and the palliative effects of cannabis. And then two of our home nurses independently pulled me to one side and said, oh, the real thing works much better. So asked the doctors, could we have the real thing? And the first time I asked, they laughed and were like, oh, no, we can't do that. He's only 11. And then I asked again, a different doctor who'd actually given it to one of her friends and had had great success. And she agreed on the condition that he didn't smoke it, which we just laughed at because we thought, well, we wouldn't possibly have given our kid cannabis to smoke. So I was trying to get hold of some sort of tincture or oil that I could put under his tongue, and none of the dispensaries seemed to know about oils or tinctures or anything. So we were struggling with that a little bit. And then a distant family member started bombarding me with Rick Simpson information and videos. And one night we were bored in the hospital, so it was like, oh, go on, we'll watch this Run from the Cure documentary. So we watched it, and it was like, there's something in this. And then we watched a Ricky Lake episode of a Ricky Lake show with a couple of kids in it who'd taken cannabis, one of them for something else. And so we thought, well, if the doctors are happy to prescribe it for palliative use, then they're obviously confident that it's not going to interfere with the actions of the chemo, which is always the big fear when you're looking at any kind of supplements. So I thought, well, we may as well give it to him in these massive quantities. It's like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound kind of thing, as they say in England. So I found some online, bought some, I had no idea what to do with it. It was just try and build up to a gram a day if you can as fast as possible. So we started giving it to him. And even though actually it turned out that this oil we got was not great quality, within 10 days of him being on this oil, he suddenly wanted to eat, and he suddenly seemed brighter, and he suddenly seemed happier. And he was on 7 different pharmaceutical medications for various ailments. And we were able to drop all of them, literally. And we'd go in for chemo and like, so what drugs is he on? And I said, he's not on anything. He's just taking cannabis oil. And the doctors were like, they couldn't really believe it. It was quite astounding, really. And then through a Facebook group, a guy had introduced 8 parents that were giving cannabis to their kids. We got introduced to Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein, who were doing the We the People documentary, and they introduced us to Mara and Stuart from Aunt Zelda's, who took one sniff of the oil we were giving to Chico and were like, you can't give him this. And we had it tested and it wasn't good. And then we started taking Aunt Zelda's oil, and they gave us a high CBD as well as high THC. And really things massively improved from there on. I'm not saying it was a miraculous, huge turnaround because he was still having chemo, but just his general sense of well-being, the number of pharmaceutical meds that he had to have it went down to virtually zero. We had 1 or 2 things here and there, but he was on loads of things before he was on the cannabis, and none of them really seemed to be working. He still threw up quite a lot, but before cannabis he was throwing up many times every day, literally every day. He was super sensitive to the chemo, and he was throwing up when he wasn't even eating. So he was it was just really horrible every day. We had so many pink sick buckets all over the house. It was awful. So yeah, it helped with his neuropathy that he was in a wheelchair because he couldn't walk properly, and the neuropathy actually stopped. He stopped getting worse, and the expectation always is that you get worse and worse throughout treatment. And the neuropathy, in fact, actually improved a little bit during treatment, which was unheard of. So yeah, it helped with the nausea and the vomiting. It helped with the neuropathy, and it also helped. He become addicted to opioid painkillers because he'd had a lot of them when he had radiation. He had lots of pain in his throat and his neck, so they started giving him IV opiates, and they ended up putting him on methadone. And we ended up doing a really smooth methadone detox. By titrating the oil up as we titrated the methadone down. And yeah, it was just like, I really dread to think what the outcome would have been if he hadn't had oil for the second half of his treatment. I mean, the whole theory of chemo seems to be that they give them as much as they can possibly tolerate. They take them to the absolute limit. Obviously they're trying not to kill them, but they need as big a dose as they possibly can in order to get rid of the cancer, and they take them to the brink and then they stop. And it's, a lot of kids don't make it, and I dread to think what would have happened if we hadn't had oil for the last few months of treatment. And we still give him a daily dose now. We're 3.5 years in remission, and he still takes it every day. And I strongly believe it helps keep him in remission. And it makes him feel better too, because he feels like he's been proactive in dictating his health. Like, it gives him confidence that he isn't going to relapse, that he isn't going to be sick again, because he feels he's doing something proactive. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated either. I think as a parent, when your kid has cancer, you feel completely helpless because you feel like there's nothing that you can do. And it's really hard to just sit back and let other people get on with trying to save your kid. But I think my attitude was just, I wanted to do everything possible that I could to help improve his odds. So, that included cannabis. We also gave him lots of supplements. I gave him mistletoe shots as well. When he went into remission, we gave him mistletoe shots 3 times a week for 3 years, which he hated. But I just thought, well, I just want to be able to do everything. I don't want to ever look back and think, oh, I wish I'd tried that, or I didn't want to have any regrets. So my attitude was find out what can work, what can help, and do my best to get that stuff into him, which is what I did. And I have no regrets about any of the things that I gave him. I'm sure I probably spent a lot of money on things that had no effect or weren't very useful. But I found a naturopath that I trusted, and I eventually found Aunt Zelda's. And I just think you have to just put your trust in people that really seem to know what they're doing. And then you feel like you're taking some sort of, not control, but you're influencing, and you're doing your best to try and help your child survive, which is what it's all about, really, isn't it?
I think what's interesting about your story, Angela, is the fact that even with substandard oil, your son got better, he improved. And with Mara Gordon's oil from Aunt Zelda's, the improvement was probably even more dramatic.
Yes.
Yeah, Aunt Zelda's amazing.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, we interviewed Mara a couple of weeks ago, and she's really taking a scientific approach toward cannabis oil.
Yes. There are so many people peddling either completely fake oil or really bad oil. I really hesitate to extol the virtues of oil, because finding decent oil is so incredibly difficult. It's one of my big bugbears with this whole industry. There's so many people trying to make a quick buck on the back of people's health.
Yeah.
And it really bothers me. And obviously it's because of prohibition, all the baddies come out and try and make a quick buck because it's not properly regulated.
Is your car a bit like an office? I'd actually say it's probably, some days it's more than my office, it's more like my home.
Really? Why'd you say that?
Well, on occasion I've slept in my car overnight on such missions, and but yeah, generally it is my office. I've got everything here I need, internet connection, Google, and email.
And cannabis oil in the boot?
Probably.
Just 2 weeks ago, Jeff Ditchfield was facing a jail sentence for possession and intent to supply cannabis. He freely admitted giving the drug to sick people, and in a landmark ruling, a jury found him not guilty.
If the person is in need, needs cannabis, then I will continue to help them.
Jeff travels around the UK distributing the drug in the form of oils, which he makes himself from cannabis plants.
I brought you some more.
Fantastic.
So I can restock you. But
Yep.
what I've actually got here this time is I have 2 different versions.
Okay.
His product is unregulated and illegal, which makes people fearful about identifying themselves. But there is a big demand all over the UK for his cannabis oils.
We're assisting the parents of over 70 seriously ill children just in the UK alone. And through the Facebook page, we're receiving around about 250 to 300 requests for help per week. That's not just from parents, that's from adults mainly, and mainly cancer sufferers.
Do you make money from giving cannabis oil to parents?
No. People's ability to pay doesn't enter into our thought processes when we're deciding to help a parent.
Jeff is visiting a mother whose daughter suffers from severe epilepsy. The daughter is only 4 years old.
What is the risk of this condition that she has?
The most serious thing that can happen is she'll die. And that's the reason why parents like myself will be giving their kids it, because when you've exhausted every other avenue and every other drug. Since I've been giving her the oil, she doesn't jump the same in her sleep. You would do anything to, to try and cure your own child. Hello.
You're not worried at all that the cannabis oil hasn't been through the same sort of clinical trials her prescribed medication would have been on?
Definitely not, no.
Because it helps her?
Because it helps her, yeah. I know I'm doing the right thing. And I know it's a lot safer than the drugs that I've got in my cupboard.
I have 2 versions of oil with me at the moment. They're 2 for you to have and try.
You sort of get to play doctor, really, don't you?
I really don't like the doctor term. Main reason being is I have no medical qualifications whatsoever. I'm not a clinician. And I would much prefer it if the UK law was changed so doctors and pharmacies could do what I'm doing. Then I wouldn't have to be a criminal, and these parents wouldn't have to act in a criminal manner either.
I've met a man who gives medicinal cannabis oil to the parents of sick children. Is that safe? Should he be doing that?
I haven't a clue. I don't know what he's giving. Cannabis itself is a very complex plant. If you take an extract of cannabis, it has 400 plus different compounds in it. So unless I know what is actually on the label, how active it is and so on like that, I have no idea as a doctor whether it's going to be of use or not. And until we get proper clinical trials going on these sort of things, all we're going to have is just anecdotal evidence. And I've known patients who've been on such oils who have gone and died soon afterwards. We just don't have the answers for this at the moment.
At the end of the day, you are providing an illegal substance to these parents. Are you just a drug dealer?
No.
In spite of all the evidence and the experience you've got, you are still giving these oils that are illegal. They've got the THC.
Okay.
You're giving them to parents. Fair enough, you're not making any money from them.
That's immaterial anyway. But when a parent contacts me, they've generally made the decision that they are going to give cannabis oil to their child because they believe it is the child's only chance of survival. So it's a decision I have then. I can say, no, I'm not going to help you, but yes, I can provide the oil. And if I don't do that, or buddies don't do that, then these parents aren't going to stop and give up. They're then going to continue on the internet like some of the parents who've been conned and scammed out thousands of pounds and receiving substandard oils. All oils are tested.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
I'm calling about my father. He's been battling cancer for almost 8 years now.
Okay.
And he's had numerous conventional treatments, and he's now at the point where they've said they think he's terminal. Since I have him on this oil that I purchased, I feel like he's gone downhill. I'm so scared at the minute that I might have poisoned my dad and that I've made things worse, and to be honest, I don't really know where to turn.
Oh, bless you. I wish I could... It's okay, it's okay. It's just that it's unlikely to have done him any harm, but it's impossible for me to rule that out because obviously, you know, we don't know the source of this oil, how it's been made.
No, of course. The alternative specialist that he sees said that she thinks the cancer's spreading now quite rapidly. I don't know how much longer he's got.
That's okay, darling.
No one.
I can send it off to the lab I use in Spain at Valencia University who test my extracts so we can find out exactly what's in it. We'll do what we can.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
That's okay. I'm just going to go and clean my head off. I'll be back in a minute.
He's really mad. Her dad is dying, and she's going to do whatever it takes to keep him alive for a bit longer. And I think for me, and certainly for Jeff, just to hear her say, I don't know if I've poisoned my father. I don't know if I've shortened his days. I think that's tragic. How do you navigate through, this online medicinal cannabis world?
You can't, and that's the problem with it. This is a useful medicine, it's a valuable medicine in clinical practice today, and it's a scandal that we so slow at moving forward with a medicine that's very safe when it's used in properly controlled amounts.
Jeff is going to meet the woman who phoned him 2 weeks ago.
Hello.
He wants to see the oil she was sold.
So we used this for a little while and it really wasn't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why there's still a lot in there, because we just stopped it.
Unfortunately, the people who are offering oil online, they fall into two categories in my mind. There's the people who are well-meaning and should shut up, and there are people who are just down and out scammers and con men. We've tested some oils that people have bought to treat cancer, and we've actually found to contain 0 cannabinoids. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is take 0.5 gram of this, and then I'll send that off to Valencia University and have it analysed.
Okay,
Find out exactly what's in it.
Okay.
And some cancer sufferers believe that, medicinal cannabis is helping to cure them. Is there any research to back this up?
There's clinical trials already going on a particularly difficult type of cancer to treat, brain cancer called a glioblastoma. There is good evidence also in other types of cancer that the activity of the cancer cells is modified by the use of cannabinoids. But it's not been translated into significant clinical practice. So the patient is left with a problem that they may have come to the end of standard chemotherapy and finds, what else is there out there? I myself have been approached by many patients to say, look, I bought this cannabis oil on the internet. How much do I need to cure me of my cancer? And I have to say, well, I don't really know what you're taking, what its effect is going to be, how much of the cannabis that you've got in that bottle of oil is going to be of use to you, or anything like that, because it's not being worked up as a medicine.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'm a 32-year-old father of... Sweet! 32-year-old father of two. I'm Jim, a 32-year-old father of two. In 2018, I was in 2018. I was involved in a serious road accident. I was involved in a road traffic accident. In 2018, I was involved in a serious road traffic accident, and I was left with multiple injuries. With multiple injuries.